Hey, nice to see you. Hey, Dora, so good to see you. Welcome, everybody. Oh, so good to see you all. Yay. Hey, Emily. Thank you so much for joining us. So, as promised, let us dive into codependency and probably most importantly answering some questions and also providing you some steps to how we actually start moving forward from this really very excruciating place. So now I received a lot of questions last night or in the last 24 hours around codependency. So I have tried to group them into themes so that we can answer as many of your questions as possible. So let's just start with what codependency actually is. So codependency is where we chronically neglect ourselves and our needs and our best interests in order to receive approval or validation, maybe even our self-identity, also our love or acceptance. So this is where we effectively self-abandon. We neglect what we need in order to get those needs met. So codependency is formed early in childhood, usually through an enmeshed family system. So what that means is a family system that really lacks boundaries. It might be a family system where, in a lot of cases that I see, usually if I'm working with somebody who's codependent, they will have had a codependent parent as well. And what often happens, although not always, it'll often be a dynamic between a codependent and a narcissistic parent. It's extremely common. So now what ends up happening with the codependency, I mean, I guess for me it's a broad umbrella term, because from what I've observed from specializing in this place is that codependency really is a huge collection of programming or beliefs and patterns that collectively make up the codependency. So the types of things that we might see will be people pleasing, and I'm sure most of us are pretty familiar with that. We'll see overgiving, we'll see often anxiety and hypervigilance. We'll really struggle to say no or to set boundaries. Some of us might be really inclined to want to fix and caretake others as a way of being seen or accepted or loved. We definitely will have an abandonment wound, either a physical abandonment wound from a physically absent parent or an emotionally absent parent. We'll also, which goes hand in hand with that, we'll have often a fear of rejection. You know, that whole being hypervigilant, looking for signs that you might be rejected, so we will often reject them first. We'll often have that sense that we actually have to prove ourselves worthy of being loved, or that we have to earn love, like it's not just inherently part of us or given to us, that we have to perform for love. We'll generally have low self-worth. I wouldn't like to say in every case, but in most cases we'll have a not good enough wound. We'll often feel really unsafe and insecure. So not necessarily in a physical sense, but emotionally, like even when we're in a relationship, we'll never feel completely anchored, safe and secure. There'll always be that insecurity happening. And in fact, with codependency, you'll often see in a relationship where the codependent will feel very, very uncomfortable about their partner, spending time away from them or going out on the town without them because of that insecurity. We also tend to compare and judge ourselves a lot, but often that gets projected onto others. So as you can see, there's actually a whole massive collection of different beliefs and patterns that were formed in childhood. And in most cases, these were well and truly formed by the time you were 7 years old. Sometimes it's a little bit older, but usually they're formed very, very young, and then we just build upon them and, repeat them and reinforce. So I've got some notes here because we had a lot of questions, and I'm really happy for people to continue asking questions on here, but I'm going to go through what I've got first, okay? So first of all, can I heal while I'm still in a relationship? Well, here's the thing. Basically, our wounding, we are vibrational and so is our wounding. So our energetic template, if you like, is holding that codependency. And so it will be very much aligned with our partner. We would have drawn in a partner that has similar wounding, although their wounding may play out the opposite. That's why we end up with a lot of narcissists. And so what tends to happen is that alignment between you both was there when you had the codependent patterning, but as you dissolve that codependent patterning effectively, so I mean you can do work, but then there's work that dissolves it and there's work that doesn't. So when you start to dissolve your own codependent patterning, you will start to notice that you're no longer really aligning with or even tolerating some of the stuff that you used to in the relationship. So yes, you can start to do your healing, and in some ways I actually think it's easier to start dissolving those patterns and programs while you're in the relationship, unless of course it's violent, then you need to get out as soon as possible. But that way, if you can dissolve those programs and patterns that would have ordinarily made you stay there, then it's much easier when it comes time to step out of that dynamic. But the truth is that the person that you're with is most likely going to have been benefiting by the fact that you would pretty much do anything and everything for them. So they are not going to like it or be particularly supportive when you start putting boundaries in place and going, I don't think so, sunshine. Okay, so you're going to start running into problems. But I would suggest that you definitely you can start your healing while you're in a relationship. But I think if you're truly actually healing at the core, it won't take long before you want to step out of that relationship, which is ultimately what we want. The only way that that relationship will work going forward, if you're doing your work, is if the other person is. And in most cases, they're not going to want to. Sometimes they do, but most of the time they don't. So what else have we got here? What's the most practical or most important thing to think about when we are healing codependency? So the truth is there are a number of things that need to be done, and they are all equally as important. But I would say, for me personally, I think the most important thing has got to be dissolving that patterning and programming at the subconscious, because those are the foundations and the rules that you live by your life by. For example, if you're a people pleaser, like most of us here probably can relate to at some point, we will have beliefs that we have to people please in order to be seen or accepted or loved. So to get us to, so we have a whole lot of foundations, beliefs and patterns that are foundations like that within us. For us to step out of codependency, we have to dissolve those beliefs and patterns at the origin within the subconscious mind. Otherwise, you're just not going to be able to step out of codependency, because all of that, of course, is sitting in your unconscious mind and your subconscious. So what's happening, even if you've got a conscious awareness of why you do what you do, you're still not going to really be able to stop it without a lot of anxiety. So for me, I really believe that is absolutely the fundamental key, dissolving that programming and patterning beliefs or inner child work actually at the origin. So how do I change? Therapy and self-help hasn't worked. So like anything, there's going to be resources and practitioners that are extremely skilled in different areas. Like, we can't all be great at everything, right? So it probably depends on whether the person you've actually been seeing has actually got an academic understanding or how skilled they actually are at doing the work. So that's going to make a difference. The self-help, there's definitely a lot that you can do from a self-help perspective for sure. But truthfully, unless you actually have the skills to dissolve the programming at the subconscious level, it's going to be really hard for you to do it, right? So, I mean, which is in fact why I create a lot of free content, and I've created my Dissolving Codependency program so that it does that for you, yeah? Because as I said, if you don't have the skills, then how are you supposed to do it, right? So, so I would say that if you've been on this path for a while and you've been doing your work, and I see this all the time, and yet you're not getting the results that you want, and you're still feeling really triggered, you're still stuck in those sort of dynamics, then I would say you probably haven't gone deep enough. You might have just been scratching the surface. So you might have been getting a little bit of a shift, but it's not going. And so what you can expect to see when you actually truly do dissolve your codependency or the patterns is what used to really trigger you before will have absolutely zero impact on you. It'll have no impact. Where you used to have to people please or prove that you're worthy of being loved, you will notice those situations come up and you think, you know what, it's just not really feeling good to me to do. I'm actually not going to do that this time, and you will be okay about doing it. It's not going to cause you that anxiety or that really strong triggering. So that's when you know that you're actually effectively dissolving those patterns. So, how do I raise a child that isn't like this? The key is you dissolve your codependent patterning or any other dysfunctional patterning that you've got, because we do parent through our wounds. We can't not. That's the filters that we live our life through. So even if we're really conscious of certain things, that doesn't mean we're not going to actually parent through it. So if you don't want your kids to be raised codependent or codependent patterning, then heal your own codependency. And if you're in a dynamic where that's really promoted, then you need to probably consider stepping out of it. So how will inner child work help me? So as I said before, there's a heap of beliefs and patterns sitting within each of us. Actually, some of them serve us really well and they're great, they can stay there, but some of them, they were created to help us survive or cope when we were children. We don't need them anymore. So with the inner child work, there's obviously different ways of doing it. For me personally, I actually use traditional methods, but very, very heavily guided, not just quantum energy, but also my guides are very galactic. So basically a lot of the tools that I use, the guidance I use is coming from a quantum space and from the higher realms. So I blend them both together. And so with that, that's why we're actually able to dissolve these patterns and programs just so easily. Often it's in a single session, actually. But your inner child work is absolutely key, but you just need to make sure it's being done at a deep enough level. Why am I even like this when I know better? Well, as I said before, these programs are in your subconscious. They're not sitting at a conscious level, although no, that's not quite right. The foundations are in your subconscious, and so even though we intellectually know that we shouldn't be doing these things or these things aren't good for us, we just can't stop, because a lot of the patterns we've created were created because we really felt that our survival depended on it. I mean, a classic is an abandonment wound, which we will all have if we've got a codependent patterning. With an abandonment wound, if we feel like somebody's going to leave us, chances are we can actually get to the point where we feel like we're actually going to die, which sounds extreme, but it's true. That is how it feels, you know, when it looks like somebody is going to abandon or reject us. And similarly, if your abandonment wound plays out in such a way that you keep people at arm's length when they get too close, like your survival depends upon keeping them at arm's length and not being vulnerable. So this is all happening in your unconscious mind or in your subconscious. So even though you intellectually know better, you know, everything is being driven from your subconscious. Well, about 95% of everything that we do and our choices and decisions and preferences and so on. So that's why an intellectual knowledge is great, but it's not going to actually make it go away. So now I am going to go through some key areas to actually help, key areas that you need to have in place and start working towards to start actually truly stepping out of this codependent patterning. But before I do, I'm just going to check to see if there are any other questions here that I haven't already answered. Okay, has anyone else got any other questions? Sorry, just going through all of these. Okay, no, I've got most of the questions, I think. Okay, cool. So, okay, firstly, now I'm sorry, as I said, I've got some notes here because I've got actually quite a few things I need to remember. Okay, so I'm just going to pop this here. So one of the things I would say is, firstly, the goal or the objective is to shift from a place of being dependent on others in whatever way, whether it's financially, whether it's to have a roof over your head, whether it's for love or connection, whatever those dependencies are, they need to be dissolved, right? So I just need you to know that this is not going to happen overnight. You're actually unraveling and dissolving a lifetime of patterns, okay? So you just need to get started and keep moving in the right direction or moving forward. So the overall objective, it's really around, it's a process of dissolving layer upon layer upon layer of patterning. It's much like getting yourself untangled from a web. And as I said, the actual objective, if you just kind of keep this in mind, the overall objective is to shift from being dependent on others for your emotional needs or your physical needs or financial needs to becoming your own source for everything. And for me, that probably took me, I was probably 3/4 of the way there within maybe 3 years, you know. I mean, the type of work I was doing at that stage with the healer I was with is different from the approach I use. The approach I use is actually a lot more swift, but still I'm giving that sort of time frame so you get a little bit of an idea. Like it doesn't always happen, you know, overnight. And in my case, I was coming from a place where my marriage had just dissolved, so I'd lost my house, my son half the time. I was a stay-at-home mum, so I didn't have a job, so I was kind of starting from really pretty much nothing. So I had a little bit further to get to the point where I am now. So now this does take consistent dedication to your healing. It does take time and action and the right tools. So one of the keys for codependency is that we've got to set boundaries. Okay, now the thing is, you won't have been taught about what boundaries are or how to set them. And I can tell you now, a lot of the people in your life are really not going to like these boundaries. So you're then starting to come up against that as well. So I've got actually plenty of content on my page around boundaries, but in my dissolving codependency program, I've actually got a whole big section on dissolving whatever blocks that you have to setting boundaries, because your blocks to setting boundaries might be different to mine, right? And I've also got a whole lot of examples of actual boundaries that you can actually use and adapt and so on. But boundaries are really absolutely key, all right? So with that, you want to start noticing, you know, when you are doing anything for anybody else. Just start listening to your body. How does this feel to me? Does this feel like an alignment, or does this feel a bit off? Do I feel like I'm just giving, and they're just taking? So that's what you want to look at. And so where it starts to feel off, you know you need a boundary. So perhaps before agreeing or offering to do anything for anybody, just stop and ask yourself, how does this feel in my body? Because if it feels off, you shouldn't be doing it. Yeah? If it feels good, great, go for it. The other thing that people don't think about, and it's so important for codependency, is that we need to set boundaries for ourselves, because we're usually our own worst enemy. Like, we are usually the ones that are actually overgiving. Often we're not even being asked to do that. We might be working ridiculously long hours trying to prove our worth, or all sorts of things where we actually violate our own boundaries. So once again, start noticing, and maybe even after this little session, have a little think about, where am I violating my own boundaries? When am I saying yes that I want to say no? What things do I do that I really don't like doing? And so once again, before you offer or before you're asked to do anything, just stop and check in. How does this feel for me? So I have to put in boundaries for myself, like because I love this kind of work. I'm often sort of not working as such, but writing or commenting or whatever at 11 o'clock at night, and it's like, hang on a minute, that's not good, so I need to keep an eye on those sorts of things as well. So that's how we start to kind of overgive. So just notice here, whereabouts might you be violating your own boundaries, and put some in for yourself. So we need to become our own provider of emotional nourishment, physical needs, and financial security. That's huge, depending where you are right now. And it doesn't matter if you don't get that all sorted today. It might take you 6 months. That's fine. It might take you more. That's fine. But you just need to get started on that in that direction. So I'd perhaps start thinking about, where am I dependent on somebody else for my emotional needs, for my physical needs, like living at home with mum and dad when I'm 30, for example. So it's kind of, what's going on here? Am I dependent on them for this? And start kind of putting yourself in a position where you can actually start standing on your own 2 feet without that dependency. Because when we're dependent on other people, that's when we're really, really open to being used and abused, because they hold that over our heads. Not everybody does, but often it is held over our heads, so it makes us very vulnerable. We end up having to put up with a whole lot more crap than we would if we weren't dependent on people, right? So another thing, get comfortable in spending time alone. A lot of codependents do not like that at all. So if spending time alone kind of makes you feel a bit uncomfortable, a bit nervous, a bit like, ugh, then that's an area you really need to start working on. Yeah, and that's about an abandonment wound, that one. Start creating a daily practice of going inward in reflection or contemplation, meditation, visualizing, journaling. And just know the purpose of doing that is that often people who are codependent or have similar patterning, because they self-abandon so much, they actually are not connected with themselves at all, which is why we keep on attracting emotionally unavailable partners, because we are emotionally unavailable to ourselves, right? So when you start coming inward and start you do what feels like an alignment for you, but if you start coming inward more each day, whether it's to journal or contemplate or reflect or visualize or meditate, it starts really cultivating a beautiful and strong connection with yourself. And that's something that anyone who resonates with codependency really does need to do. So once you have a really strong connection with yourself, that's when you start getting a really strong sense of who you are and who you're not. Because most of us are so outward facing, we wouldn't have a clue who we are and what we like, because we're too busy focusing on what everyone else wants. What else is there? Right, and the other thing I've kind of touched on, but I'm going to say it again because it's super important, around strengthening your connection with yourself, really start noticing what feels good in your body and what doesn't. Because ultimately, your resonance will always guide you. It doesn't matter what kind of decision is, big or small, it will always guide you around what is right and in alignment for you. And when you're doing things that are in alignment for you, that's when you really fly. right? That's when you'll find that you're more in your purpose. Things flow really easily, like ridiculously easily for you, because you're absolutely in alignment with your truth. So one of the little things that you could start doing, it sounds a bit silly, but you can do it this way, is I would look for opportunities each day to start noticing the differences. So it might be when somebody asks, hey, do you want to go hang out or whatever, you know, you might, rather than just immediately saying yes or no, just stop and ask yourself, do I actually feel like hanging out with them tonight, or do I feel like staying home? And just notice how that feels in your body, because you will be guided. It will either feel good or it won't feel good, one or the other. And then ultimately, of course, you want to start, making decisions and choices based on what feels like a good alignment. Okay, and that's how you'll also stand really solidly in who you are and who you're not. The other thing that starts happening when you really start to master that, which doesn't take long, a week or two, and you'll have that sorted, is that your energy field starts to really reflect that. Instead of being a bit chaotic and a bit of this and a bit of that and a bit of everybody around you, it starts becoming more pure and more distilled version of you. And when your energy field is a more distilled version of you, instead of being pulled in all sorts of different directions, you start to draw to you the things, the people, the opportunities that better align with you. Whereas if you're all a bit chaotic and a bit of this and a bit of that, then you're going to attract a bit of this and a bit of that. Does that make sense? Okay, so what else is here? Practice knowing what your needs are and prioritizing them. So once again, like whenever there's choices to be made, it might be making dinner or preparing dinner, just stopping and thinking, okay, well, what do I actually want? Instead of putting everybody else's needs first. Sometimes obviously it's totally appropriate to put someone else's needs before your own, but not as a constant. That should not be your default. So yeah, start getting to know, what are my favourite things? What do I love to do? What do I really not like doing? Because again, we've usually been so outwardly focused. Most people I work with initially, they don't have a clue what they like and what they don't like, because they're too busy thinking about and looking out there. Now, stepping away from people who cross your boundaries or are happy to just take, basically take advantage of the fact that you're going to give and give and give. So that can be that can be a little bit for people, but it really needs to be done. So you need to create a safe and sacred space around you where you can start to actually heal, where you can start to no longer people please or no longer caretake, and without being guilted, So maybe following this wee session, just have a cast your mind back. Who in my life really do continually violate my boundaries or take from me or make me feel like I've got to stand on my head to make them happy? Because those people really, honestly, if you don't take a step back entirely, you do need to take a bit of a step back from them so that you can actually start to heal. And if you can't, then that's telling you that you've got some other unhealed wounding there that's causing you to continue to be attached to them. So all of this stuff, just so that you know, is all in my Dissolving Codependency Selfpaced course. So you can basically take that and it will guide you from where you are right now, right the way through dissolving your patterns and programming and triggers at the origin of the subconscious mind. Okay. Now, has anyone got any other questions? So, how to say no without hurting people you love in everyday choices. That's a hard one. I actually had to do that the other day, and this person really, wheels fell off and all the rest of it. And I guess it depends on the situation, but I would suggest firstly trying to do it when you are feeling solid yourself, like when you're not feeling triggered, or as soon as you're triggered, you're going to be off balance straight away and they're potentially going to make mincemeat of you. So I would wait until you're feeling quite solid within yourself, but also it depends on the situation, but I remember saying to this person, look, I really, really love our friendship and I love the conversations we have, but I just need you to know that I'm no longer available, as it turns out, to talk with you about COVID, because they're clashing about it and it was causing a lot of problems. So that was a way I was needing to say no to this person. So again, it depends on the person and on the situation, but coming from a solid place yourself, actually being gentle and compassionate, but also remembering that their reaction is their business. Do you know what I mean? Like, it's not your job to be responsible for their feelings or their reactions. If you're being respectful and kind, then how they react, honestly, is actually on them. It's not on you to sort out. What's the difference between codependency and allowing someone to help you? It's really, codependency, as I mentioned before, is a collection of a whole lot of different wounds. Like if you relate to, I won't go through the whole list again, but the usual, the people pleasing, the caretaking, the low self-worth, all of that stuff, chances are it's not actually just letting people help you, right? So the way I would potentially know whether it, check whether it's a wound or an attachment happening, is I would ask myself, how would I feel if that person took their help away from me? Ultimately, you want to be really neutral. If you're really neutral about that, then there's no attachment there's no toxicity. But if you're all of a sudden like, shit, I can't have them take that away from me, what am I going to do? Or if you feel angry or upset by it, then you have an unhealed wound. That's what it is attaching to them. Hope that answers your question. Hey Rob, nice to see you. Nice to see that you're leaving that situation. Well done. Does self-work help if one is living in a traumatic household? Yes, it does, but there does reach a point. If you're living in a household where it's chaotic, where it's toxic, basically, what I would suggest that you do is you create a safe and sacred space in that house, and it's mostly going to be your bedroom. That is your space to maybe put your crystals, put your oils, that's your space where you can go, you don't have to be on, you don't have to perform. So I'd create a safe and sacred space. Nobody comes into that space unless they're invited. It needs to be your space. But there is going to get a point though where you do need to get yourself out of that space. And I know, obviously I don't know everybody's situations, of course, and I know though that a lot of the times it might seem really impossible at first to think, how the hell am I going to even do this? But I want you to know that there is always a way forward. There is always a way forward. But if you can even start, as I said before, dissolving the patterns at a subconscious level, it's going to make it so much easier for you to step out of that situation. It's still not going to be a breeze, but it's going to be much easier. You're going to be much less triggered than you would have been if you did not do that work. How do you deal if your partner is codependent and you're not? Well, I would be doing what I need to do. Not in a selfish way, but it's not... If we, it's one thing holding space for somebody, but if they're not doing the work, they're not recognizing what's going on, and they're not really doing the work, then you've got to kind of consider, is this serving me? Is the situation serving me? Because if it's not, you probably need to start thinking about stepping away. And if you can't, or you find that a bit panicky, then you've got some attachments going on as well. Hey Justin, nice to see you. Okay, I feel that my relationships have been trauma bonded. I'm okay with being alone, but these partners seem to come out of nowhere. How can I resolve? So if you are experiencing quite a bit of trauma bonding happening in your relationships, that means that you have quite a bit of unhealed wounding yourself. So what you really need to be doing is diving in and dissolving that unhealed wounding. And if you're single at this time, honestly, I'm going to be really honest here. For me, I just think you can move forward a lot more quickly, truthfully, when you're on your own, you know, because you can do this healing work without having to worry about impacting anybody else or managing other people's needs while you're at it. You know, you can just focus on your healing. So that's what I would be doing. I would be diving in and doing my own healing around dissolving your dysfunctional patterning. And just to be clear, we all have unhealed inner child wounds. You know, I'm sure at some point they're all healed, but I don't think anybody would escape childhood without having some unhealed childhood wounds or programming, dysfunctional programming, being brought forward. Okay, now have we got any other questions there, guys? Might be nearly done. Beautiful. Okay, guys. Does anybody else have any other questions before I let you guys go? Oh, we're looking good. Okay, guys. Hey, look, once again, thank you so much for being here. I appreciate you tremendously. And just also, if you're wanting to know more about the codependency, dissolving codependency course, click on the link in my bio. It's all there. But in the meantime, I am sending you so much love and blessings. Mwah.